My reflections on the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Part 1, coming up right after this. Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So grateful to have you. I'm Yoel. And in today's video, I'm going to discuss the first of a brand new podcast or video series called The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is hosted by Jeffrey Garlin and Susie Essman. It's wonderful. You can find it on YouTube, and I'll link to that in my notes below. I suggest that you subscribe to that, particularly if you're a Curb Your Enthusiasm fan. And as they kind of alluded to in the show, if you're watching their show, if you're watching this video on that, chances are that you are as well. And it's really packed with information. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because really the show Curb Your Enthusiasm is so deep. It cuts on so many levels. I think that's the reason why it resonates with so many people. You know, I heard from a friend, I don't remember who it was. I wish I could give him the credit, but there's, in the Jewish tradition, there's the written Torah, which is the actual Torah, the Bible, the Old Testament, if you will. And then there's the discussion of that written Torah by the sages. The ancient sages would discuss that Torah, and that became the oral law. Okay, all that by introduction. What I'm getting to is that that was compiled in a list by Judah, the prince, and that was called the Mishnah. That's where they discuss the written Torah, and that oral Torah became part of tradition. And following that oral Torah discussion called the Mishnah, it was further discussed and analyzed, and it goes on and on and on. But the next kind of analysis of the Mishnah oral Torah is called the Talmud, the Gemara, which is a discussion of later sages on the earlier sages' discussion of the Torah. Okay, and somebody said to me quite rightly that, you know, Seinfeld is the equivalent of the Mishnah. It's kind of so deep, and there's so many different levels going on in the Seinfeld show. And then you have Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is like the Talmud or the Gemara, which is like a further deepening of the discussion, which is already a deepening of discussion of the Mishnah from the Old Testament. And I'm kind of like, you know, in describing it, it doesn't sound as good. If you're part of the Jewish tradition, and you know, he said quite simply, you know, Seinfeld is the Mishnah and Curb Your Enthusiasm is the Gemara, is the Talmud. And that's really how deep Curb Your Enthusiasm is. So I was so excited when I stumbled across this new podcast video series by Garlin and Essman. And I felt, as I was watching it, I was like, wow, they have so many insights, and this is great, because I always wanted to know about the history, and I wanted to delve into the shows themselves and discuss them. And now you have two of the main players who are actually discussing it. Jeffrey Garlin, obviously being one of the founders, as he talks about, I'm going to get into in the show, of Curb Your Enthusiasm. So that's super exciting. And I thought that, you know, as representing the average Joe, if you will, who is a big fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm, I have my own insights on that I think could add to the discussion. So that's why I decided to do this video. And this is going to be part of a series. What I intend on doing is really following their episodes and giving my take on it, to give that sort of perspective. You're getting the perspective from people involved in the show, but I feel, in my modest and humble way, that I could provide that insight from the fans' point of view, from the viewer's point of view. And it's just that type of show that just runs so deep that there's so much you can discuss on it. And I'm very excited to be doing this. It's funny, I actually discovered this video series after I had recently done a video on the secret to Larry David's success, which I remember. I'll place a video card link over there below. Make sure to watch that, but open that as a new tab. Don't go away from this video first. Finish watching this video, leave your comments. I'm curious to hear what you have to say, but definitely check out that video about Larry David himself. I think you'll find that insightful as well, if I can say so myself. But this video is about my insights, as I said, on the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I'm going to try and follow along with their videos and provide my own insights. Okay, so, you know, without further ado, something that kind of struck me, I wanted to mention as well before I forget, that what I also want to do is add some lessons from that, some lessons that we can take away from the development of Curb Your Enthusiasm and from the different shows that transpired. There are all sorts of life lessons that you can apply, as you'll see, as I'm going to get into. In fact, that's my first point. Okay, so my first point is that when I did the video about Larry David, one of the secrets to his success I had mentioned was that he's persevered through failure. Okay, and that, again, that runs for a lot of different people that have been successful, but that's so what? That's part of, you know, what makes great people great. That is their ability to persevere through failures. And right off the get-go, in the opening of the first part of this new series by Jeffrey Garlin and Susie Essman, he talks about how Larry David, after the enormous success of Seinfeld, so it's not like Larry David only had failures, he had huge success with Seinfeld, but after Seinfeld, he had 2 failures after that. Okay, I think there was a movie called Grapes of Wrath, and there was another show that he did. I don't remember the name of it. It goes to show you how memorable it was, where it really failed. And nevertheless, Larry David didn't give up. He still kept at his writing. He still kept at his comedy, and goes to show you, look what developed as a result. Curb Your Enthusiasm. So really, it's a lesson to all of us, is that we've heard the idea of persevering through failure. There's also the idea of persevering through failure after success. A lot of people start to get that fear, like, oh, maybe I'm just a one-hit wonder. And I'm sure Larry David could have had that. Maybe he did have that feeling. But ultimately, despite his success and subsequent failures, not once, but twice, he was able to succeed. And something else that Jeffrey Garlin mentions is that Larry David took a lot of shit, as he says, as he puts it. And I've talked about that idea as well, most recently in an Adam Sandler video that I just completed, this idea of what Arnold Schwarzenegger talks about, which is disregarding the naysayers. Don't let the naysayers get you down. In life, we're always going to have naysayers. So a lot of them are well-intentioned. A lot of them, they think they want what's best for you. They think they're giving you good advice, but really a lot of times all they represent is the negativity and the naysaying. And Jeffrey Garlin mentions from the get-go of this new video series how Larry David took a lot of shit, but nonetheless, he continued to persevere. He continued to do his thing and do it his way. And thankfully, we were given the gift, because really it is a gift, of Curb Your Enthusiasm. So I wanted to bring out that point of persevering through failure and disregarding the naysayers, as Arnold Schwarzenegger very aptly puts it as well. Now, the next thing that struck me is just the idea of being in the right place at the right time and surrounding yourself by good people. So how did Curb Your Enthusiasm come about? Well, Jeffrey Garlin had an office in the same office space at Castle Rock as Larry David and some other famous people, including Billy Crystal. And really, I think that's really important. Jeffrey Garlin doesn't really get into this too much. He does talk about the idea of the fact that he was, really surrounded by very legendary talents, if you will. Billy Crystal, of course, Larry David, but really putting himself to be in the right place at the right time. And that has to do with surrounding yourself with the right people. So I really, congratulate and give kudos to Jeffrey Garlin for having the knowledge and the wisdom to put himself in that environment where he's around really comedic geniuses. And when you're surrounding yourself with comedic geniuses, it's not a surprise that a comedy such as Curb Your Enthusiasm is going to develop as a result of that. And how did that develop? Well, again, Jeffrey Garlin had an idea. Larry David is talking to him because he's in the right place. They're sharing an office. And that's what happens when you share office space with people. You start to shoot the shit and you talk about different things. And Larry David was talking to Jeffrey Garlin about his experience, Jeffrey Garlin's experience, helping others such as Jon Stewart develop a special. So Larry David was thinking about doing a special. And then Jeffrey Garlin had a light bulb go off in his head. And he's like, you know what? I've got an idea. Why don't you do a special about the process of doing a special? Which is really interesting too. Garlin doesn't mention this, but the whole idea of Curb, you always have that kind of art imitating life, imitating art. So one example that comes to mind, which we'll get into as the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm gets into this show down the road, the whole idea of the Seinfeld reunion, where you see life imitating art and art imitating life, and everything gets convoluted and it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. And Larry David is being his Larry David character, but he's also being his co-creator character on Seinfeld, and it's all coming together. Again, if you're a Curb fan, you've definitely seen the Seinfeld reunion episodes, which are literally brilliant in how they're done. And the infancy of the show's idea mirrored that. It started off on the idea of art imitating life, imitating art, which is doing a special about doing a special. So I just think it was a genius idea that Jeffrey Garlin came out with, and he wasn't shy to pitch that to Larry David. Almost he makes it sound like it was a spur of the moment type of thing. And sometimes those are the best ideas, the ones that kind of just come out. It's just that inspiration, that aha moment that comes to you. I've also watched the documentaries on the creation of Seinfeld. They interview a lot of the writers of different episodes. And one in particular, the Soup Nazi episode, what actually happened was that Spike Ferenson, who wrote that episode, I don't remember if there was a co-writer on that, but in any case, he talks about how he was always pitching ideas to Larry and Jerry Seinfeld. And this wasn't even part of his pitch. He was just mentioning this funny soup store where the guy runs it like a Nazi. They call him the Soup Nazi. And Larry David started laughing hysterically. And Ferguson said, and so did Jerry Seinfeld. And Ferguson was like, that wasn't even a show he was pitching. But as he started talking and talking about the store more and more, I think it was Larry David or Jerry or both of them were like, that's a show, write about that. So just the idea of surrounding yourself with great people and also throwing out ideas, not being ashamed or embarrassed or shy to throw out any sort of idea, to talk about anything that may be funny, anything anecdotal, that could lead to great things. And we see here that Jeffrey Garlin had that stroke of genius, and that turned into what we now know as Curb Your Enthusiasm. Okay, which by the way was supposed to be just a 1 hour special. It was never intended, at least initially, to go on to become a TV series, but we get into that later on. I think it's in the next installment of the History of Curb Your Enthusiasm show, where they talk about how Larry David realized as they were doing this special that, hey, this could become a series, and thankfully it actually ended up becoming one. Okay, now something else that I wanted to bring out, it was interesting when the show started. I remember watching the pilot of Curb Your Enthusiasm, and when I had seen it for the first time, it was really confusing to me because it was like, who is this real? Like, what's going on here? Like, I saw it was definitely funny and it struck a chord, but it was hard for me to tell what was real, what was not. In other words, like I had thought at the time that a lot of it was real, but they were kind of making it into like a comedic type of thing. It kind of reminds me of the show Jury Duty, which I finished watching recently, where one person there thinks it's, for him, it's very real. Kind of reminiscent of the show The Truman Show with Jim Carrey also, where it's like everybody's in on it but one person. Same with Jury Duty. So I kind of thought that when I saw Curb for the first time, I actually thought that was the idea. And I think that's what the genius is about it. It was so new and so fresh that I only realized after the fact, I'm like, wow, this whole thing was fictitious. But Garlin and Essman, when they're discussing the show, they talk about this idea that it was always supposed to be fictitious. But for the person, try to think back to when you saw the pilot. So I'm curious about your thoughts. Leave that in the comments. Did you realize from the get-go that it was fictitious? Because I certainly didn't from the very early onset. It took me a little bit of time to catch on, and I just wanted to bring that out as well. As again, that unique perspective as a viewer, I thought it'd be interesting to hear how I, as a viewer, and I'm sure many others like me, viewed it for the very first time. Okay, now another interesting thing, I talked about this in my idea of the secret to success. I think this is in Larry David, certainly in other secret to success installments that I've done for other successful actors in the show business industry, that Larry David spots talent so well. So what happened? He asked Jeffrey Garlin to play the part of his manager, his business manager, Jeffrey Green, on the show. And I don't believe Jeffrey Garlin was acting at that point. He was developing series for different people. I think he said he was known as being that series developer, but he himself had never acted. And I don't think he thought at the time that he's even going to be in it. But Larry David realized, you know what? Here's a guy that could actually play a role, not only be a producer and come up with the idea for Curb Your Enthusiasm, he could actually play a role as my manager. And that's what he did. And I also think it's genius that he kept his first name. We have that a lot. We have Larry David has his name. Jeffrey Garlin is Jeffrey Green. Okay, Susie Essman is Susie. Cheryl Hines is Cheryl. I think that's great. And as Jeffrey Garlin talks about, Larry David must have known what he was doing because they had an unbelievable instant chemistry together, as if they had worked together for years. And really, they were friends. They weren't friends to the extent that they are now, as he talks about, but they were just kind of like office friends, and they had an instant chemistry together. And that, I think, you got to give credit. You give credit to Jeffrey Garlin, of course, in his role and how he does as an actor, but certainly to Larry David for spotting that talent and realizing that. And they also talk about the idea of Cheryl Hines. And I've always said, I think that she's a very underrated actress because people don't realize how difficult it is just to do improv to begin with. All the actors on that show are tremendously talented. But not only that, the fact is that they recognize talent in Cheryl Hines, and they say in the History of Curb Your Enthusiasm, in this first installment, how they had a lot of different actresses that auditioned for this role, many of whom went on to become very successful actresses, but nobody quite nailed it like Cheryl Hines. And that's particularly because she had that improv background. And I think I've always thought she's underrated. I was very gratified to hear that they as well really recognize the talent that is Cheryl Hines. And they say that she's going to come onto the show. So I'm very excited to hear, her comments and her thoughts about it. And I'm very, and I just think that it's amazing that, I was able to understand that, if I could say so myself, and that they're saying as well, they're kind of validating the idea that Cheryl Hines had to be somebody who can hold her own with a talent, with a comedic genius like Larry David. And she's done a fantastic job as well. And something else that struck me is this whole idea of having no actual script. So of course there is an outline, and I can relate to that. I think that's what also one of the things that really contributes to the show. The fact is that the actors are doing improv, but with that outline. It's kind of like these YouTube videos that I do, and many others do as well. I don't have a specific script where every single word that I'm going to say in my videos I write out. I have ideas. I have it written down over here on a piece of paper, and I talk about the ideas. But imagine I was reading from a specific script where every single word was on the page. It just wouldn't sound natural. It wouldn't be authentic. And that's what really adds to the Curb Your Enthusiasm flavor, just how authentic it is. Now, of course, you have great shows with a very specific script. Seinfeld was very scripted, and that is certainly a style. That is a style that's obviously very acceptable in the industry. I think most shows are scripted, but Curb Your Enthusiasm was so fresh precisely because it's unscripted in the traditional sense. Okay. Now, something else that struck me is that the budget starting out was very low for Curb Your Enthusiasm. So it goes to show you don't have to start with this huge budget. You don't have to make this huge splash or be these gigantic budget television shows or movies in order to have success. You can have success on very limited resources. And I think that's an encouragement for all of us. I myself am doing these YouTube videos pretty early on, but I have faith that this channel is going to continue to grow. And I'm doing it on a shoestring budget, pretty much no budget. Curb Your Enthusiasm did it on a low budget. And if Curb Your Enthusiasm could become what it's come now in its 12th and final season, according to Larry David, although nobody believes him, but let's say it is 12 seasons coming out of a very low budget. It goes to show you that great things could happen out of low budget. So don't give up if you think that, oh, I don't have the money and I've got to have funds or I've got to have some financial backer. No, you can make things happen on a very limited budget, particularly in this day and age where the internet and all the apps out there and all the different social media channels are so ubiquitous. There's no barriers to success other than yourself. You're really your own limit. And I know it's cliche, but it's really true. You got to just believe in yourself and believe in your concept, believe in your brand, whatever it is you're doing. Don't worry about the money or the resources behind it. Oftentimes, by the way, that will come, and it will come with time as you gain more popularity. But don't think you have to start with this tremendously huge investment or have tons of money behind any idea that you're doing. You can make it happen on a shoestring budget. And finally, the last thing I wanted to bring out, the whole idea, I mentioned the authenticity of Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's also interesting at the end of the first video, Jeffrey Garlin says, this is it. This is the first episode. We're done. And I want this in. I like this shit in. And I love that because that's authenticity. And that's what people relate to, especially nowadays. A lot of times it's hard to cut away from what's authentic and what's genuine. But when you kind of leave that stuff in, that really adds to the authenticity. And sometimes I wonder if I should practice what I preach. I certainly am not the best video editor out there. I do edit my videos. I do have times where I say things and I have run-on sentences and I have to cut out parts and bits and pieces. And sometimes stylistically, it does make sense to do that. Okay, but sometimes it's worth keeping in an error or a blunder or something like that, because that adds to the authenticity. People see that you're real and we're humans and we make mistakes. Okay, although even in Curb Your Enthusiasm, they do edit. I mean, Jeffrey Garlin talks about the idea that they have to cut away a lot because Larry David is laughing. So nobody's saying you shouldn't edit and you shouldn't try it and have the best stylistic product that you can have. But at the same time, if you find that you've made a little error or there's a little bit of a blunder, there's something funny, sometimes keep that in your video. If you're a YouTube creator or whatever it is you're doing, it's okay to be human. It's okay to have a mistake. It's okay if not everything that comes out of your mouth is perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good. So sometimes it's great just to be yourself. And I really got that takeaway from the very last part of the first video of this History of Curb Your Enthusiasm video. Okay, so those are my thoughts and reflections as a fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm on this brand new History of the Curb Your Enthusiasm podcast video series. So excited that they're doing it. Can't wait to the next one. And let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you have any comments. What are your thoughts about Curb Your Enthusiasm? What did you think about the first episode? I'd love to see your feedback. And I'm looking forward to doing the next one. And as always, I'm grateful that you joined my channel, that you came to this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And looking forward to seeing you at the next one. Hey guys, this is your annoying reminder to please hit that subscribe button. You'll be helping me out, and you'll also get notified of the next cool video. And check out the other videos on my channel. There's some great stuff over there, all sorts of topics. Take care.